About 20 years ago, I moved from the real-world Harry Potter land of the Cotswolds in England to the south coast of New South Wales in Australia, and from a pastoral landscape of rolling hills and honey-coloured stone cottages to a rugged and ancient coastline on the edge of the Pacific Ocean. That meant adapting the landscape photography techniques I'd practiced for years from those rural English outlooks to the altogether more demanding world of coastal photography and seascapes. I had always been jealous of photographers who had access to the coastline and the many photographic possibilities of the ocean, waves, the weather and the landscape and how they're connected. But I soon realised that I had to start my landscape photography journey from scratch, to build my knowledge, to learn new techniques, to come to understand how best to photograph seascapes. So if you live inland and rarely get out to the coast, or you'd like to make it a regular feature in your photographic portfolio, I'm happy to be your guide. Just bring some waterproof shoes and a tolerance for sand in unmentionable places. There is a lot to cover on this subject, and so rather than make some stupidly long single video, I decided to kiss the boots of the YouTube algorithm and break this down into a series of shorter videos. This is the first in the Seascapes series in which we talk about some of the common pitfalls that you should be aware of. Before I started regularly shooting seascapes, my knowledge of tides was limited to the fact that, well, they come in and they go out. My ignorance meant that I failed to make the most of some solid opportunities back in those early days, and more seriously, I put myself in decidedly dodgy situations. So the first thing you need to acquaint yourself with is the tide times table. There are plenty of apps out there that show tide times, and it's crucial to familiarise yourself with them because the tide governs not just whether a location's usable or not, but also what kind of shots you'll be able to take. It doesn't sound like rocket science, but I'll be the first to admit that when I first started out shooting seascapes, I was often disappointed to discover that the rocks I wanted to photograph were under several feet of the Pacific Ocean. For instance, one of the local photography hotspots near me is called Cathedral Rocks, and access to this location is governed entirely by the tide. When the tide's in, literally half the rock shelf is completely underwater, greatly restricting the kind of shots you can take unless you pack a wetsuit, a dome port, and a plucky attitude to life and limb. Down the coast, at the world-famous Horsehead Rock, you have to scramble over some wicked jagged rocks in order to access the little beach in front of the rock. Let me tell you, as someone who's attempted it with the tide in and a swell running, I wish I'd done a bit of forward planning. The tide can, of course, also cut off your route away from a particular location, so always check to see if it's a rising or a falling tide. The Tides Near Me app is free and available for iPhone and Android. Shows all the local tide times along with sunrise, sunset and moonrise and set times. Alternatively, the awesome windy.com app has full tidal information along with swell and wave height. And speaking of swell, the ocean swell is what's gonna deliver those dramatic seascape shots and provide opportunities for longer exposure images. But it pays to understand how wind and tide produce that swell. Firstly, always check a decent weather forecast app to see what kind of swell height is impacting the coast. And more importantly, what are we doing when you plan to be there? Typically speaking, anything over 1 meter in height is surprisingly enough to score dramatic breaking wave shots. so don't assume you'll need some 15-meter Chupo Code Red monster waves. Remember that the swell height is only an average, and you will get waves far in excess of that at regular intervals. Surfers call these cleanup sets. When you arrive at your chosen location, it's a great idea to simply stand and observe for at least 5 to 10 minutes, because it's only then that you'll get to see the range of the swell and how it impacts the places you're thinking of setting up your tripod. Even after observing the ocean for a decent length of time, you should always keep an eye out for rogue waves. These are often more than double the average wave height and can come through every 2 to 4 hours. The cardinal rule is this: never turn your back on the ocean. In terms of photography, you really don't need a massive swell to score some great shots. Even swells of 1/2 meter or less can provide ample flow over rocks and great opportunities for long exposure imagery. That said, if you can safely photograph the coast when there is a big old Code Red style swell, you definitely should, because nothing beats the drama of humongous waves breaking on a rugged shoreline. The coastal environment is chaotic, and it's one of the locations which is likely to kick you right in the arse the second you go in autopilot mode. I've lost more than my fair share of equipment to the fickle gods of the coast, and every single time it's happened is because I lost focus. You may have the most expensive tripod on the market, but the surface it's resting on may not be as reliable as you think. Gusts of wind have a nasty habit of arriving just as you go elbow deep in your camera bag. Mitigate the risks of unforeseen events by weighing down your tripod, for instance, but never assume everything's going to go your way. So yes, those are some of the aspects of coastal photography that you may like to consider before heading out to score some keepers. Now let's consider a few pitfalls from the actual photographic process. Firstly, if you're shooting a panoramic sequence that includes the ocean and therefore the horizon, your software is going to have a really hard time stitching that part of the image together. There usually simply isn't enough in the way of distinct details for the algorithm to compute the overlap between those shots. This is particularly true if you're shooting an aerial pano at the coast with your drone. With generative fill in Photoshop, it's possible to fake unstitchable overlaps between photographs, but even then you may end up with a horizon line with steps in it. If you can use your camera's built-in single pano mode, then that's a good workaround. The next pitfall is not to recognize the vastness of the ocean and fail to compensate with it with either some foreground interest or a larger photographic theme, such as a beautiful, colorful sky. Yes, the ocean looks incredible, but you probably won't be able to convey any of that in a super wide shot. That means you're going to have to put the tripod lower down than you ordinarily would in order to include some foreground in the form of rocks, waves, seaweed, or driftwood. We'll get into more of the compositional stuff in one of the later videos in this series, but just remember to fill your frame. If you're going to be shooting at the coast on a regular basis, then you're going to have to step up your maintenance program. You don't have to get your equipment wet for it to feel the impact of that corrosive salt water. Whenever I return from the beach, I always rinse the tripod off from top to bottom, not just the lower legs, in fresh water. Open the catches or screws and let the fresh water get in there too. Wipe down your camera and all of your lenses that you use with a high quality lens cleaning wipe. I buy the Zeiss pre-moistened lens wipes in bulk from Amazon. I'll put a link in the description below. Be methodical about your cleaning. Lift the little door flaps on the SD card and wipe that too, because the saltwater air can and will get everywhere. If you do a lens swap at the coast, then at some point you're going to get some shit on your sensor. You can either send your camera off once a year to get it cleaned professionally, or do it yourself with a specialist sensor cleaning kit such as VS GO or Eclipse. If you do go the DIY route, be very careful, particularly if your camera has in-camera stabilization, because it's easy to break if you're too heavy-handed. If you want to take photos in very close proximity to the ocean or even in it, then you should invest in a good quality waterproof housing and dome port. These are expensive accessories ranging from between about $700 and $4,000. Rain covers are a great way of protecting your camera while still giving you full access to all of its controls. Niwa sell covers for a vast range of cameras which cost about $40 and can be stowed away in your camera bag. And that will do us for this first part of my Seascapes series. Do please remember to hit the old like button if you got value from this content, and consider subscribing to my channel for more photo, video and drone related content from me. Ta-ta for now.